Welcome, everyone, to the Religion Unplugged podcast. I am Joseph Holmes, Religion Unplugged's resident culture critic in residence, which is the title that I gave myself. With us today is another incredible contributor of ours, Ryan Burge. He's professor of practice at Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University. He previously taught at Eastern Illinois University. His previous books include The Nuns, Where They Come From, Who They Are, and Where They're Going, and with Jim Davis and Michael Graham, The Great Dechurching, Who's Leaving, Why They're Going, and What It Will Take to Bring Them Back. The Burge has written for the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and Politico, and has appeared on 60 Minutes. Who's pastor of an American Baptist church for more than 17 years and lives in Mount Vernon, Illinois. His new book, which we're talking about today, is called The-Vanishing-Church: How the Hollowing Out of Moderate Congregations is Hurting Democracy, Faith, and Us. Ryan, welcome to the show.
What an introduction. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. I am obviously, a huge fan of yours, read your stuff all the time, and cite you a lot in my own writing. So I was definitely, and this particular topic that you're talking about has been something that I've been dealing with when I'm writing my own culture pieces about movies or other things. And so I was really excited when you announced the book. Now, for people, your book is titled The Vanishing Church. When people think about vanishing church in America, when the average person thinks of that, what they're typically talking about is how many people are leaving church wholesale, particularly young people. So the church in America is shrinking, and maybe the church around the world is shrinking. But you're specifically talking about the moderate church in America that's vanishing. Explain to me what you mean by the moderate church and why that matters.
Yeah, and let's be clear definitionally. What I mean by moderate church is not a church full of moderates. I think I want to be clear about that. That's what people are like. You mean conservatives aren't welcome? And I'm like, no, conservatives are welcome, and also liberals are welcome, but it aggregates out to a moderate church. So you've got liberals and conservatives and moderates all sitting side by side, and so the makeup of your congregation is not 80-20 or 20-80. It's 40-40-20 or whatever it is. So that it ends up being a congregation of people from left, right, and center. That's really what I mean by moderate congregation. Politically diverse didn't go really well in the headline, so that's why I got left out. That's really what the goal is to have these politically diverse churches. They used to be the norm in America, and I think a lot of what I do in my work is just say, hey, it's not always been like this. American religion is in a space that we've not really seen, since we've had modern polling, in that, most of white Christianity, and not just white evangelicalism, but white Christianity across the board, is now Republican, overwhelmingly Republican in many ways. It used to be 30 or 40 years ago that almost every church in America was politically diverse. You had left, right, and center, the Catholic Church, even evangelicals. I think one of the things that's going to really come out of the book is that in the 1970s, white evangelicals were majority Democrats. And actually, even into 1990, white evangelicalism was not a Republican thing. It was actually mixed. And that is what we're losing in American life, because now white Christianity is just becoming overwhelmingly Republican, conservative. The nuns are overwhelmingly liberal, and kind of shockingly liberal in some ways, far outside the mainstream. And I think that's really the problem we're facing, is that there are not religious organizations that are politically diverse. They're not third spaces in America that are politically diverse. And without that diversity, without that like face-to-face contact, that sitting next to someone in the pew every Sunday, it's easy to demonize and mischaracterize and be hateful and be uncompromising, because you're not compromising with your friend, you're compromising with someone you don't like, maybe even you hate. And I think that's, religion declining. When I went to write this book, sort of the operative idea in my head was, everyone's writing books about religion declining and how that's bad for the church. I want to write a book about how religion's declining, and that's bad for all of us. Whether you're a religious person or not, it's bad for society, it's bad for yourself, it's bad for community, it's bad for democracy. So I wanted to make sort of I call it my big swing argument, about the decline of American religion. That it's bigger than what you think it is, and it matters more than you think it does.
Yeah, this is really, really cool and really interesting. I, in many ways, see this as a companion piece to Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, because one of the less talked about aspects of that book is he talks about, the same way you did, anthropologically, the one of the functions of religion in society was to bind people together. Say, hey, here's where we gather together around our shared commitments, our highest values, and then we can go off in our own directions throughout the week. And we still have a certain degree of shared trust because we know that our primary commitments we all share and we all meet together in person regularly and do that. And so, and he would focus obviously on social media and how that's fragmenting us in general. And that's bad for us in a variety of ways. And of course, you can find him on X. You could read that book and talk about that angle of it. But you're talking about why the church, like he says, used to in America and not that long ago function that way as here. And, there are different denominations, obviously, there's different splits, but in general, like even the individual churches that, even if you were a part of an Episcopalian church like I grew up in, or if you're in a Southern Baptist church, you probably were sitting next to somebody who was, of a different political persuasion than you. And so that ability to function as, like you said, a third space in America is largely vanishing. Yeah. Now, so I'm interested, and I want to kind of you to unpack this, because for me, what's really interesting is that the divisions are essentially becoming religious right versus secular left. I think that what you are describing. And it's kind of weird because, we used to be majority religious in a country. It was a majority Christian majority. And so it's weird to me that we went down this road because, particularly looking at your graphs, because it's like it didn't have to be this way. It seems like what would be most obvious is you would have conservative leaning churches becoming more conservative and liberal leaning churches becoming more liberal. Everybody's kind of radicalizing into their own religious pockets. But what you're describing is that essentially the, conservative churches are becoming more conservative and the liberal to moderate churches are just emptying out. And then everyone is filtering into, the nones, whether that's atheism or agnosticism or none of the above. I don't affiliate. So what in your research has kind of explained why that's the direction that we went in?
So that's actually probably the most interesting fact. I think a lot of people go, well, there's a balance to the force, right? So, okay, so, the Southern Baptists have become more conservative, but obviously then other churches have gone the other direction, sort of like balance out the pendulum. And the reality is that hasn't happened. There's nothing that counterbalances the rise of white evangelical republicanism in American Christianity, not even close. And I think this is something that when people, like, I study this all the time, and like I get all these misconceptions. Like I love when people say, well, of course, and you're like, that's not true at all. Like, where did that idea come from? Because it's just demonstrably false, and not just like, if you look at the data a certain way, it's false. No. Like, it's just false. Like the idea of like the liberal mainline. Like this is something that I think like the Twitterati talk about a lot. You have to use the word liberal in front of mainline. You have to, like, it's a law. That's demonstrably false. Now it's true with the clergy. I wrote a piece about this, maybe 6-8 weeks ago. Mainline clergy are very liberal. That's just demonstrably true. But the average mainline Protestant, so United Methodists, 60% of United Methodists voted for Donald Trump in 2024. So tell me how that's liberal. I'm missing the point on this. The Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, the Presbyterian Church USA are both 52-48 on election day, leaning towards Trump. Really, the only majority white denomination in America that's strongly Democratic, big D Democratic, is the Episcopal Church, the one you just mentioned. Only 30% of them voted for Donald Trump in 2024, but that's it. But then think about like what they are numerically. There's 400,000 Episcopalians who go to church every Sunday. Meanwhile, there are 6.5 million Southern Baptists who go to church every Sunday. So again, the scales do not balance with 400,000 here and 6.5 million here. And that's not just 6.5 million. I didn't even talk about the non-denominationals and the Assemblies of God and all these other denominations. So, really, it's not like, oh, in white Christianity, you can find a great, liberal leaning church and a conservative leaning church. No. You can find a lot of great conservative leaning churches and almost none on even in the middle or to the left of center politically. All those people have basically fled and joined the the nones. And, that's atheist, agnostic, nothing in particular, folks. And now, the Democratic coalition is basically 45% non-religious. So, that sorting out thing is something we don't. My job is sort of draw the big picture, right? Like these macro level forces that are facing American society, and then making it, and then, really the goal with this is to write a book to someone like me who wants to go to church but looks around and goes, "Wait a minute, why are my options so bad? And why are they all so one noted?" To say, here's why. I can actually show you why and tell you why, and then help you understand why you can't find a spiritual home, because there's not a spiritual home for lots of people who are in the sort of mushy middle of the political and religious spectrum.
Yeah, I think this is again fascinating, and I'm sorry, guys, you're going to hear me say that a lot because it's true. I've not, full disclosure, finished the book, but I am in the middle of it, and it has really, I've just been gobbling it up. I've tried to was saying, oh, I'm going to read it a couple of chapters before I do the interview, and it's like, oh, I'm halfway through the book now. So I'm really excited about this book. But one of the things I thought was really interesting was watching your and my kind of parallel and lines in terms of our biography, but also kind of where they were the inverse. So you kind of grew up in kind of more conservative evangelical Christianity, and then you found a home in a more mainline church where it's like, oh, a lot of my doubts are welcome here in ways that they weren't. And you pastored the church for many years until it eventually closed down. And for me, and I grew up in an Episcopal church. My dad was an Episcopal minister, and he was he was what we would call then kind of sort of theologically conservative, pastorally liberal. He would be considered moderate, like one of those extinct pro-life Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
And but I found that of the Episcopalians I knew, he was one of the only ones who kind of believed that Jesus was God and actually literally rose from the dead. In fact, he talked about in seminary, he had a professor he talked to who said, well, we all believe Jesus is our Lord and Savior who died and rose again, but we just mean different things by that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I would joke, one of my longstanding jokes is that I grew up Episcopalian and also Christian. And so, as I grew up, I became kind of increasingly disaffected with the Episcopal Church because it was hard to find a place where, people took my faith as seriously as I did, it seemed like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found, a lot myself gravitating towards a lot more people who would be considered evangelicals, because it's like, oh, like you actually take your faith seriously and it's first in your life. It's your primary commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And those people would say, here's why I think that my politics flows naturally from my faith. And it would oftentimes very much align with conservative. But what I found in the Episcopal Church was that, and you kind of describe this in your book, and correct me, if I'm wrong, my anecdotes don't align with the data or what I've read in your book, my interpretation of it. But there would be, from the pastors, from the leadership, this idea that, certainty, it can't really be found in your faith. We're going to have a lot more moderation, a lot more room for doubt. The place of faith is a seat of doubt, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But the working assumption was that the place of certainty needs to be found in, and I don't mean to say this cynically, even though it's going to sound that way, upper class, liberal, white, progressive values. Whether it's like, the assumption we're going to make, not the argument we're going to make, but the assumption we're going to make in our conversations is things like, things like equality as sort of defined by the political left, things like freedom, things like, tolerance, things that are kind of within that sphere. Those are the places that you can find certainty. You can find certainty in the New York Times, less so in the New Testament. And I was kind of like, well, again, if I'm going to be a Christian, I'd rather say my primary commitment is going to be to that. Otherwise, why go to church on Sunday? Why not just join a political action group? Why not make that my primary commitment? And it's interesting because I see this like in the movies also, prior to The Chosen, the favorite movie of evangelicals of Jesus was Passion of the Christ,
Mm-hmm.
which makes, again, doesn't try to argue for Jesus's divinity, it just assumes it, and then makes Jesus this kind of conqueror of the spiritual evil through his suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the favorite movie of sort of the mainline Episcopalians, those people I knew, was The Last Temptation of Christ, where it's all about doubt and Jesus struggling with his doubt. And to me, like, that's just a perfect exemplar of kind of like the different Jesuses that everybody's working with in these contexts. So I guess, is that kind of, so, and again, when I was saying this, when you talk about sort of the political kind of extremeness of what goes on in evangelicalness, I remember, again, I became sort of more pro-life as I got, further in this, because, I would listen to people like Lila Rose, who's a Catholic pro-life person. She would say, like, you talked about how, like, there used to be more exceptions for rape and incest even in conservative evangelicals. And I had that too. And then I listened to her and she said, look, no matter what happens, even this horrible thing happened, that's not the fault of the child. You can't punish the child for that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, here's this woman who's explaining this very logically. And I hadn't heard that argument before. It's like, oh, of course. And so you can see this whole thing happening in my own life, what you're describing in the book, which is sort of what is perceived to be a mushy religious commitment, but a strong political commitment among the clergy of the main line, and a strong religious commitment among the conservatives, who then go on to explain why they think their politics flow naturally from it. Whether or not you agree that that's true or not, they go on to explain that to you in a way that's persuasive. And then so the people who have this strong religious commitment start to identify more with the religious right. Is that a accurate summation of what it seems that the data is saying on that score?
Yeah, no, I think this is something I have like this philosophical idea in my head that some people are psychologically predisposed to be evangelical and some are predisposed to be mainline. It's hard to, like, that's where you get like brain chemistry and you have to do like twin studies and all this stuff. And that's like a really kind of a shady area of social science, honestly, is like, it's called, there's something called genopolitics, which is like your politics emerge from your DNA. Essentially, like, you're predisposed to be Democrats or Republicans, which feels right in some ways, but just seems almost impossible to prove, right? It's like, what causes autism? There's 100 genes we've identified, and so which one is it, like, turns on and off in a certain way? And in this, it's like, well, what makes you, like, it could be 1,000 genes, right? So, but it does feel that way. Like, I think some people are dispositionally attracted, to one style. Like, I was always a guy, like, if a pastor stood up on Sunday and seemed like really sure of themselves, right? Like, the Bible clearly says, unless you believe blah, 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 you die and you go to hell. My first thought was, okay, how do you know that for sure? And B, why don't I feel like you? Like, why does my brain not, you know what I mean? Like, why does everything click? Like, all the tumblers click in for you and the tumblers do not click in for me. Like, why am I repelled by certainty? And you are like, you find your home and your comfort in this certainty. And I think the main line has always been like the home for the other side, right? For the doubters, for the people who want to believe but struggle with belief, but don't want to feel like they're less than. But then, and this is, and I do resonate with what you said. Like, I wanted to take my faith seriously, and the main line really didn't allow me to do that. I can't. I thank God that I grew up in an evangelical youth group, because, like, we took God seriously there. Like, I don't know if mainline youth groups do the same thing, because I didn't grow up in a mainline youth group, and obviously there's not that many mainline youth groups because there's not that many mainline youth in America. Like, let's be clear about that. But, like, I liked the fact that it made me wrestle with these ideas all the time, on a bi-weekly basis, about my purpose and meaning and what my sin life like, and all these accountabilities and all these things. And that set me up in a way where I really thought, like, I care about this. Like, I want to be a deeply religious person. I care about my spirituality, and I have a way that's being fed and nourished. And if I grew up in a mainline church, like, you're surrounded by folks. Now, there's some people there that are very committed. Like, I do know some people in the church. I go to a United Methodist Church now. There are some very committed people there. But I don't know if I would have grown up in that church if I would have had that same like deep well of commitment that I did. So like, there's like the evangelical is like this negative term. Like I ran away from the church. Like I actually kind of like I'm more of a balanced view of like evangelicalism, right? Like it did, yeah, I think it did mess me up in some ways. Like I think with purity culture messed a whole generation of people up in all kinds of ways. But I also, I read the Bible. Like I did Bible study. Like I had a personal prayer life. Like I was actually struggling to become more like Christ. And I think like those ideas also became deeply seated in my psyche and my habits and my personality. And that carries me through into the main line because now it's like, okay, I can still be a committed Christian, even though this church doesn't seem like it's as hardcore about Christianity as evangelicalism is. But I will say this when I went to, I've been going to church for like 18 months now, and I go, probably 40 times a year, which I think is that's pretty good. I went on Easter and I was so mad because it was full, and it's never full. Like if you go to an evangelical church, like it's full all the time.
All the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Like every Sunday, 80% of folks that are like solid members are there, every Sunday.
And Easter, it might be overflowing, but it's
Yes.
still full.
Yes. It goes from 80% to 110%.
Yes.
In the main line, it goes from 40% to 90%. Like it's a different thing. And I was like, who are all these people here? And that made me really understand like the cultural mainlineism.
Yeah.
Like I didn't get that even, I was a Southern Baptist kid, and then I went to an American Baptist church. I actually don't believe American Baptists are that mainline in reality. Like we actually are pretty evangelical in some ways. Like our folks were there. You know what I mean? Like they were there 80% of the time, like the Southern Baptist kids that I grew up with. So that was a real culture shock for me, and it almost made me mad a little bit. It's like, why don't you take this more seriously than you do? Like this can matter to your life. But for a lot of them, they have that whole like old mainline view of like, well, I'm one of the big lawyers in town. I've got to be a member of a church, so I got respectability. So I guess I'll be a member of the Methodist Church because that's what you do. And I will say my evangelical sensibilities go, oh, that's bad. Like that's exactly what was preached against in the church I grew up in for 20 years. And I still can't get that out of my head that like, you're not real Christians like I am because I show up and put the work in and you're just here twice a year. So, that's my grump with the main line is it really does fall into a lot of the stereotypes that the evangelicals have made about it. And like I said, if I grew up mainline, I don't know what I would be right now. Like I'm glad I grew up evangelical and committed to that because that's given me my spiritual foundation that has existed till I'm in my mid 40s now. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but thumbs up for evangelicalism in some ways. It's actually done me some good.
Well, one of the things I appreciate about you, and this is what I'm always haranguing people for, is there's a lot to criticize about evangelicals and evangelicalism. And, the thing is, most people can list off the top of their head, all 10 things, like I say, 10 things at least that are wrong with evangelicalism. And there's a good chance they'll be right about all 10 of them. But people really do give the main line a pass. Because one of the things I point out, I talk to people is that, look, the only reason anyone cares about evangelicalism is they're the only game in town. And they didn't used to be. If the main line hadn't, abandoned, done something wrong, they wouldn't have been, they would have disappeared, essentially. Now, again, you can argue maybe done something wrong, but like there's some kind of culpability you have to ask about what went wrong with the main line to make evangelicals the only game in town. And that's something that a lot of people don't wrestle with. I see this again. I do a lot of, showing how movies that we watch reflect and also engage with things in our culture. And one of the things I've really enjoyed this renaissance of, both the faith-based film industry, but also Hollywood, like taking faith more seriously in its movies. And I recently watched the movie Wake Up Dead Man, which is, a Knives Out mystery. But one of the things I wrote in there, in my review of that, it frustrated me, is that they basically said the problem with the church, again, is the religious right. And we just need to stop being like the religious right, and things will be good, be okay. And I was like, okay, but like I grew up in the Episcopal Church, and their whole thing was let's not be about the religious right, be like the religious right. And that didn't go well. You have to ask, why has the proposed alternative not worked. And again, I think one of the things I like about your work is that you take this seriously. You're actually asking, your whole book is, okay, why has the moderate place disappeared?
Mm-hmm.
And what can we then do to create, like you said, a yin and yang, an alternative space? Because like you said, again, it boggles my mind, because you can imagine a world where it was different. The conservative churches were about conserving tradition,
Mm-hmm.
not general cultural tradition, like like, I mean, again, like Southern slavery. It's like, okay, you're about or economic tradition, or just kind of like parochial immigration, things like that. And the liberal churches were ones really committed to the words of Jesus and applying those to their politics and saying, okay, no, we're about the social teachings, and but we're the ones who believe in the actual resurrection of the dead, or whether it's like we believe in the Bible first and our politics flows from that. And the conservative churches are more about, like I said, conserving cultural traditional things. And so
Mm-hmm.
I guess, I don't know if you have, George, George Yancey, who's Black Christian sociologist, did a really interesting book to me that has influenced me a lot, called One Faith No More, which he talks about, like you did, the Scopes trial in the 20th century. He kind of talks about that as kind of a pressure point where, a lot of, the main line said, maybe my first commitment is to liberal values like reason rather than fidelity to scripture. And the people who were evangelical said, no, my first commitment is to scripture, to heck with all anything else. And
Mm-hmm.
there's sort of a split happened that way, to which in sort of sociological practice they almost became two faiths.
Mm-hmm.
If not, leaving aside theology, like in social practice they kind of became two faiths. I
Mm-hmm.
guess for me, my question is, why do you think it went that way?
Mm-hmm.
Where sort of the concern, because you talk about even in the Catholic churches, the the people who are going to be most committed are going to sort of become religious rights eventually. Like they're leaning in that way. And the people who are more liberal are kind of going to be less committed to the faith, even though you point out within the Catholic tradition, within the Christian tradition, super incredibly committed Christians said, no, this is going to make me more liberal. And
Mm-hmm.
so I guess if you have any thoughts, why did it go this way, where commitment meant being conservative rather than liberal, at least for in the perception of things, and then
Yeah.
eventually the reality?
Isn't that the million dollar question, right? Is why did it not go the other direction? I feel like we should go like, there used to be a TV show called Sliders. Like, what if something went different? Like, how would we live in that reality? Like, what if there was the religious left that won, right?
Yeah.
Man, that's a cool idea for like a book, right? Like, what would the future look like if the religious left won? I think a couple things here. One is that I think a lot of white people who said they were Christians in the 70s were actually not Christians at all. And so they started like the 90s gave them permission to walk away and go the other direction because they were already leaning towards secularism. But I also think like the issue with Christianity is I think in some ways it's inherently conservative because it's
Hmm.
saying like we've got to stick with tradition. Like think about the Catholic Church for God's sakes. Like it's I
Sure.
mean tradition is like the core of what it is. And like let's not go changing things willy-nilly. So like we've always defined marriage between one man and one woman. We've always had two genders and men have always been pastors. Like all those things are sort of like built into like they want to conserve the culture, right? And progressivism is like no. Like we it's like theistic evolution, right? Like our understanding of God and the Bible changes over time, so therefore our policies must reflect the changes that are happening in America, in world society, right? And so I think I think that's the issue is that I think conservatives, and you can also see this in constitutional debates, by the way, like
Hmm.
originalism,
Yeah.
is the idea of like what the founders thought when they were putting pen to paper in 1789 is how we should still interpret the Second Amendment and the First Amendment, and and then the liberals are like, no, man, like it's a living document. It's got to reflect the fact that we have the internet now. Like we have to reinterpret it. And I think like there's actually like a significant literature now in political science that says that we kind of read the Constitution the way that we read the Bible, which is that like
Hmm.
we sort of lean into like we if you're a liberal, you want to try to like make that living document argument. Like obviously we can't use the original text. It was written by a bunch of people 3,000 years ago who didn't understand science and technology and stuff. But then the conservatives say, yeah, but those are eternal truths that will that will survive until the extinction of all of us. So why would we change it? So I think like that philosophical predisposition, right, towards like how do you think about things? Like is everything malleable, or do we need these sort of concrete scaffolds around our lives? Whether you're born in 2000 BC or 4000 AD, it doesn't matter. Like those scaffoldings are not going to change. And meanwhile, liberals would say, but why not? Like why shouldn't they change? Our understanding of science and the world and truth and human nature has changed dramatically. Even in the last 50 years, it's changed dramatically. So why don't we update ourselves? So I think actually, like, again, to go back to what I talked about, like dispositionally, I think some people are just inclined, like certainty for them is a comfort. It's a warm blanket. And for other people, certainty is like it's a straitjacket, right? It makes them feel like they can't evolve and they can't change. And I don't know why that is, like why we are like that. I think for me, though, the point of the book, I hope for a lot of people is if they're not dispositionally aligned for certainty, they're probably not in the church anyway. But that doesn't mean they don't have to have a church home, right? Like they can't find some place that would reflect their needs and their wants. And my big grump with everyone is like, I wish I could find a church for someone like me. Everyone thinks that, but then no one does anything about it. Like if you all would just like go and show up at a local church on Sunday, all of a sudden you'd be like, wait a minute, we are who we were waiting for. Like
Sure.
this is the change that we want. So it's almost like a collective action problem that we have in America right now, which is like, no, you go first. No, 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 no. You go first. And then sort of like wet the ground for me. Then I'll come to church after change it and everything. It's like, no, man, if like these people who want to go, and actually a lot of Americans still believe in God, 85% still believe in God, they're dispositionally aligned toward religion, but don't go. Like if they would all start going, I don't see how that's a bad thing, honestly. Like you would have to do a lot of work empirically to show me that that would be a bad thing for us, like societally, democratically, and individually, by the way. Like I think individuals, their lives would actually be demonstrably better, substantially better by just being part of a. And by the way, I'm not advocating for Christianity here. I'm advocating for you going to church or a synagogue or mosque or I was at a UU church on Sunday in Nashville. It was great. I'm like, this is great. Like, this is what religion's supposed to be. There's 70 kids there. And I was like, oh, this is great. Look at all these kids. And they're all talking. And, afterwards they have an hour of social time. And then they go to lunch. I'm like, good gracious, man. Like, our lives would be so much better if we could just do this kind of stuff. And guess what? In most areas, a church is a great place. Like this guy tweeted one time, he goes, I wish there was a place to go that was like free. They didn't really have alcohol or anything. You just like hang out and like play games and, meet people and stuff. And I was like, you're going to hate my answer to this question. And I said it. I go, listen, there's probably one less than a mile away from you right now that would absolutely love to have you show up on Sunday. And then all the comments were like, no, not that. And I'm like, what are you waiting for, man? Like, what can we like? There's nothing that grumps me more in my middle age. This is like Grandpa Simpson yelling at clouds real quick. People who like tell me like they're miserable and they're lonely and they're anxious and they're depressed, and I give them tangible steps to dig themselves out of all those things. They go, no, not that. It's like I can't save you from yourself. At some point, like if you want your life to be better, you have to make tangible. This is like evangelical conservative Ryan coming out right now. Like you've got to take responsibility for yourself. You can't blame it on institutional anything or societal this and that. Guess what? You can solve your problems. You can cure your loneliness. You can find a partner. You can find friends. You can find a job. But people are just content now to blame it on everyone else and blame it on the church. And I think that's actually a bigger problem is it's the church's fault. Yeah, in some ways I think it is. I think the main line especially shot itself in the foot multiple times. Some of the evangelicals shot themselves in the foot. But, as St. Augustine said, apocryphally, potentially, the church is a whore, but she's my mother. Right? Like, it's not a perfect institution, but guess what? It's where we come from. It's where we find, our peace. And by the way, our great-grandparents fought and died in 2 wars for us. And guess what kept them going when they couldn't see their spouse or talk to their spouse over FaceTime because they were fighting in the Eastern Theater against the Nazis? Church, faith, this belief in something bigger than themselves. That's what got them through. And I love how our generation's like, nah, dog, we don't need any of that stuff. Like, we can figure it all out ourselves. Look around yourself and tell me how well that's going. Because the answer is not very well. I mean, I don't want to be the guy to draw the straight line between those two things, but like, can we not at least admit something is happening here? Like, everything's awful, but it's not because religion went away. Like, you can't tell me that there's not something to do with those two things. Now, causally, it's hard to draw a straight line, obviously, but I mean, it's just hard to reject what you see and feel and read all the time right now.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I want to get to in our remaining time that I think is really fascinating. One of the things, again, I appreciate about you is that the trend in culture, essentially, and I've seen this in Hollywood. Again, I watch a lot of movies, and one of the things I notice is that one of the trend lines in Hollywood is actually not to go with the, not to dig their heels into secular atheism as good, but actually to encourage kind of, liberal spirituality, not religion, so to speak, but like, again, sinners, in the movie posits, this evil, sort of patriarchal, oppressive, and powerless Christian religion, but then
Mm-hmm.
does a very positive, Black folk spirituality, which is, a female is the kind of head of that. That's kind of, and so there is this trend line that is religion is bad and spirituality is good. And what I've liked that you have pointed out is that, well, if you look at the data, actually most of the good that we see is associated with the religion aspect of Christianity rather than faith, rather than the spiritual, the individual spirituality aspect. And again, you can do the correlation causation debate all day long, but it's like,
Mm-hmm.
if you're finding the positive benefits of faith, it's always going to be correlated with the religion aspect. As you talk about, belief, belonging, and practice, it's the practice aspect of it. Are you going to church 3 times a month or more? Again, one of the things I thought was fascinating is some of the data that's like, look, if you want to find out one of the biggest ways you can, as a man, not find out if the man you're talking to is toxically masculine or not, is does he go to church 3 times a month or more? Because if he's going to church 3 times a month or more, he's actually the least likely to be a toxic masculinity guy, which people would think like, what? It's like, no, it's like if he professes being a Christian and he doesn't go to church, run away. But if he professes to be a Christian and does go to church, he's your guy that you want to actually hang out with. And people are like, what? They can't believe that because the culture has said, no, the more religious they are, the more dangerous they are. But the more faith-based they are, the better they are.
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Mm-hmm.
fascinating thing. And again, it's funny to listen to here because, it's you making a similar pitch like, Jordan Peterson was making, where he was saying, look, young men, he says, well, these people don't believe what I believe. He says, well, who the heck cares?
Yeah.
Go anyway. Because
Yes.
you know what? You'll fix them up and they'll fix you up.
Mm-hmm. Like,
And
what do you have to
yeah,
lose? You know what I
right,
mean? Like, what do you have to like? No one is going to come to you and go, "Hey, you said the creed. Did you really
right,
believe like every clause of the creed? Because if you didn't, you got to leave." Like, seriously,
right.
guys. Like, they go, "Well, I would feel like a phony for being there." I go, "We're all phonies." Like, come,
Yes.
like I think they have like like, actually, you haven't got to the last chapter yet, but I have this like section where like the perfect's the enemy of the good. Like,
Yeah.
you're not going to perfectly align with any church you go to. You're not going to perfectly believe everything they believe. You might not even believe a tenth of what. Who cares, man? Like, there's a value in showing up. Like,
Yeah.
even actually, there's probably more value in showing up when you don't want to than when you
Mhm.
do want to. Because, like, depression and anxiety keep you away from people. But what helps lift you out of that is being around people. So,
Yeah.
like, I tell people, I go to church all the time and, like, my mind will be restless. I can't focus. And, like, I got 7,000, tasks in the back of my head that I need to do. And so I'll just sit there and I'll just say the Jesus prayer over and over again to myself, just as like trying to create some sort of discipline in my life, like and try to train my mind and quiet my mind. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But like, I mean, not to get too spiritual, I want to, when I die and hopefully go to heaven, I can say, geez, I tried, man. Like I gave it my best effort on most days to do my best, and like get my mind in the right location. So like, give yourself an hour of space just to sit there and just try. Get off your phone, turn off the TV, and you might love the singing and you might join in with the creed and you might really be vibing with the sermon. But guess what? A lot of Sundays you won't vibe with any of it, but there's a discipline, a practice to just showing up. And man, whenever I went through the worst times of my life, I look forward to the structure in the organization and just the scaffolding that church provided for me. Is like, I know what's going to happen next. I know what we're going to do next. And in some ways, like when life is like, especially work from home and flexible schedules and like everything's like in flux, like church is like, nah, man, we do the same thing and we're going to do it the same way. We're going to say the same creeds and sing the same songs. And guess what? Pentecost Sunday comes every year. And it's like, man, there's just a lot of like, in a world where everything's adrift, to have like these solid pillars in our lives. I mean, like the idea of like we're drawn towards certainty. I don't think we're drawn towards certainty. We're drawn towards structure. I think all of us are drawn towards some kind of structure. And most of us don't have any structure in our lives. And religion, whether it be Judaism, Islam, Christianity, or whatever it is, they're structured. And I think that in some ways, by the way, can be salvific. Maybe not in the theological sense, but like in the personal sense. It can save you from yourself, from your anxiety, your depression, your loneliness, your uncertainty. Like it can help you get through those things. So I mean, I feel like I'm being an evangelist right now, and maybe I am, but I really do think that most people, not all people, I tell people, like, I don't think it works for everybody, and I don't know why, but I don't think it works for everybody. I think you take the average person, you make them go to church twice a month, 3 times a month for a year, 2 years, they're going to be better off in 2 years than they are right now because of that commitment they made.
So you've talked about sort of the bad scenario, where if we don't have a third space and Christian where people can come together, the things that we're seeing in the world right now, where we're getting more divided, and therefore, on an individual level, we're more lonely and depressed and anxious than we ever were because we're not gathered together. Okay. And then at a societal level, we're becoming more politically polarized and demonizing each other because, again, we're not together. We're not hashing these things out together. We don't have higher commitments than our politics. And therefore, we are, more Civil War-esque than we've ever been prior to aside from the Civil War. Those are kind of the nightmare scenarios. And you're saying, okay, if we have the church, if we go back to church, we start going back to churches, even if the people don't agree with us. And I think this is interesting because Dr. Jean Twenge, who's a sociologist, she wrote Generations, and she said probably the biggest thing about the reason people are not going to church is because the new religion is, algorithmically curated social spheres, where it's like I do believe I don't want to be around these people unless they believe exactly what I believe. And so your kind of evangelism is saying, no, that is a false religion. That whole the I need to algorithmically curate my social life and my content, my movie content, my entertainment. That is hell. That is a false religion, and people need to go back to just being around other people, even if those people are different from us.
I'll give you a story.
Oh, please do. Yes.
Perry Bacon, who used to be a columnist of the Washington Post. He and I have been friends for a while. We talk about stuff. Grew up in the black church. His dad was a pastor in the black church, so he grew up in the black church, like going all the time. And then, he grows up, gets a good education, starts writing for publications, 538th and the Washington Post, starts drifting away from religion. And, we talked about this. And, he said, I just can't believe in that stuff anymore. And I don't like a lot of what, because he's becoming politically liberal and he doesn't like what the church is up to on, gender stuff and sexuality stuff. But he was telling me one day, he goes, I miss the community of being part of a church. I said, you should write about that. Like, you should actually write an essay, like, about what that feels like. Because I think a lot of people would sort of resonate with that. And you can like put a pin, like say, like, this is a marker, man. Like, I'm saying this. And and I don't want to take credit for it, but he wrote a piece that actually went viral. Like it actually got like a lot of a church. I think the title was like a church for atheists or a church for agnostics is what it was called or something like that. And he basically makes this case like he doesn't want to go to a church with his kids where he has to then tell his kids later on why they disagree with the church. Like what the church is saying. And I thought that was really interesting, and a lot of people said, yeah, like me too. Like I feel the same way. Like I don't want to go to a church where it feels that way. And then Ross Douthat from the New York Times wrote an interesting response: is why would you not want to expose your kids to beliefs that you disagree with? And I actually think in my case, that's a more compelling argument. That's actually the anecdote I use in the book under the section "The Perfect's the Enemy of the Good." Like you can't find a perfect church where everything they say from the pulpit you agree with, on anything. But guess what, man? Like part of being a human being in a functioning democracy is willingly subjecting yourself to people who you disagree with virulently, but doing it in a kind way. Like I hate to be like this guy who says the most basic stuff ever, but just because they say something you disagree with is not violence. Okay, first off, words are not violence. Let's be very clear about that. On the left and the right, like I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, dude. Like, but grow up, man. Like, we're adults in an American society, and not everything is trauma either. FYI. Like, I had someone tell me once that I don't go to church because I was in youth group and I wore a skirt, and the youth leader told me it was a little too short. And I was traumatized by that. I'm like, you're not traumatized by that. You're looking for an excuse right now. Like, let's get real about these things. It's okay to be in a diverse space of people you disagree with. And then you can talk about your disagreements in a fun, interesting, helpful way. Yet we've lost that because the algorithms don't make us do that anymore. And listen, I don't know like how hard it is to say we're worse for this. Like we are worse for doing this, period. And church is one of the last ways to like touch grass. You know what I mean? And to live in a real life. And we're not doing that either. So
this is fascinating to me because, again, I'm looking back into my parents. And one of the most interesting things I found, I think this goes back to why evangelicals have a better retention rate, is this book, Handing Down the Faith, that I read was mentioned that one of the most key aspects of handing down your faith, what you believe, whatever it is that you believe, is if you talk about your faith with your kids once a week or more. And I remember reading that and saying, wait, people don't do that? Because when I was a kid, again, my parents were theology nerds. I mean, like that's what they liked talking about. But what we would do, and this is kind of where it goes with movies, is we would watch movies all the time that said and did stuff we disagreed with.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, my parents we would talk about it together and say, well, this is where, it fits with what we believe. And here's where it doesn't. Here's where I disagree with what they say. And here's what I agree. And we would grow up engaging with these things and not saying you can't watch these movies because they disagree with our worldview, but to actually say, here's what we believe. And here's where we're engaged with it. And here's why I think they're right. Here's where I think they're wrong. And so I think it's actually one of the most healthy things you can do to have families where you're, whether it's at church or whether it's the movies you watch or whether it's that you're engaging with the world and then saying, well, here's where I don't agree with that. And that they say, here's why. And training your children to actually critically engage with whatever they're doing, whether it's school, church, movies, pop culture, the algorithm, or whatever. So I guess before we wrap up, I want to kind of ask, because we talked about the collective action problem. And because people are like, again, sometimes I think, hey, maybe going back to the Episcopal Church wouldn't be such a bad thing. But it's like, man, there really is nobody my age there.
Mm-hmm.
As a single guy, it's like, that's a priority. That's a little bit of a priority for me. And so it's, Jonathan Haidt, when he talks about the phones, one of the things he says is, hey, let's actually get institutionally involved, either laws in place so that we don't have to deal with the collective action problem. Because people say, hey, I'd like to get off my phones, but all my friends are still on their phones. So what do I do to prevent being socially ostracized? So he goes the legal route, the institutional route with that. And I'm thinking one of the things I've heard you advising is, look, just you be the person to do that and go and take that personal responsibility to make that happen. But in order for that to work on a societal wide level, it's kind of like everybody has to do that rather than just one person doing that.
Yeah.
And so I would say ask, and besides, okay, just go to a church, you know, what are other things you would kind of advise or suggest for people as to what would it take to actually fix this problem, so to speak?
Choose to be more social. Like find one. And that's the thing, if people aren't inclined toward religion, I'm amenable to that, right? Like I'm like, fine. But find something else to do. Dungeons and Dragons, a board game club. Like the local library has a meeting. Go to the Toastmasters. Like become part of the Elks or the Moose or whatever. Your community probably still has a few third space things that exist, and they're probably on their last legs. But you've got to find one. Or guess what? Start something. Like a neighborhood meetup once a month. You go to someone's house and have dinner, or find you've got it's harder and harder to be social now than ever before, which is like the promise of social media was the opposite. We're going to get more connected. No, we're not. It's going to make us less connected in real life. It's going to make us we're more fake connected. It's just like, it's vapor. So like be the person who initiates the thing. Like let's go to dinner. Let's go to happy hour. Let's, like I'll give you for instance. I don't love going to high school sports, but I live in a small town. I go because a lot of people are there that I want to talk to, and we have a chance to talk. Like do things that you don't necessarily love doing, but will give you the opportunity and the space to make connections and be social. And I've met new people like crazy in the bleachers of a high school football game because you sit next to this person and then someone else comes over and you're like, oh, this is so and so, and you meet them and you got to force yourself into being social. Now, our grandparents didn't have to do that because it was just like natural because everything you did was outside the house because you had nothing to do inside the house to keep you entertained. And now it's the opposite, right? Like it's easier to entertain yourself in the house and out of the house, but you got to be intentional about flipping that. And in most opportunities that you are given to go be social, you should say yes to them. Here's what I've realized. I say yes to stuff like that, and then like 2 hours before, I have to actually go do it, and I don't want to go do it, and I almost try to cancel, and then I don't cancel, and then I go, and then I come home and go, man, I'm really glad I did that. And then a week later, I go through the same cycle again. It's like my default position, like I'm in the rut of I don't want to do anything. And my brain keeps telling me I don't want to do anything. But then it also is like washed in dopamine when I go do the thing, but I forget that part. So like I have to constantly, like I have to fight against my better nature, if that makes any sense. Like I've got to steer against the current and like go the other direction. It all comes down to this idea of like intentionality. Like being a little more thoughtful about the decisions that you're making that you don't even realize you're making and what that's leading you to in your life. I think that is a really important thing.
Well, this has been an interview with Ryan Burge about his new book, The-Vanishing-Church. And if people really are interested in what you're saying with your book, want to check out your book, or just interested in hearing more from you, where can they go?
You can go to graphicsaboutreligion.com. That's the old newsletter Substack. You can go to drburge.com. That's my personal website. Or you can just go on Amazon and find The Vanishing Church. Just Google it. You can find it. It's coming out in January 13th, so please order a copy, buy one for your friend, people you hate, I don't care. Like, it's going to start a conversation. I guarantee you that. I don't think many people are going to read this book and not feel some kind of way about it, good, bad, or indifferent. So just buy the book, support the work, subscribe to the Substack, and you can follow me on Twitter at Ryan Burge. I tweet graphs and get yelled at. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for joining us. And thank you all for joining us. This is Religion Unplugged, your one-stop shop for all the best religious news and culture.